Hello and welcome everybody to another edition of the Morgan Memorial Library's Classics Cut program. Today we're going to bring you a special little treat, slightly early for a Halloween celebration, but something that we all hold near and dear to our hearts, The King in Yellow by Robert Chambers. Specifically, we will be reading In the Court of the Dragon, as well as The Yellow Sign. So please stay tuned and enjoy the show. In the Court of the Dragon. In the church of St. Barnaby's vespers wore over. The clergy left the altar. The little choir boys flocked across the channel and settled in the stalls. A Seuss in rich uniform marched down the south aisle, sounding his staff at every fourth step on the stone pavement. Behind him came that eloquent preacher and good man, Monsieur C. My chair was near the chancelled rail. I now turned toward the west end of the church. The other people between the altar and the pulpit turned too. There was a little scraping and rustling while the congregation seated itself again. The preacher mounted the pulpit stairs, and the organ voluntary ceased. I had always found the organ playing at St. Barnaby highly interesting. Learned and scientific it was, too much so for my small knowledge, but expressing a vivid, if cold, intelligence. Moreover, it possessed the French quality of taste. Taste reigned supreme, self-controlled, dignified, reticent. Today, however, from the first chord, I had felt a change for the worse, a sinister change. During Vespers, it had been chiefly the chancel organ which supported the beautiful choir, but now and again, quite wantonly, as it seemed, from the west gallery where the great organ stands, a heavy hand had struck across the church at the serene peace of those clear voices. It was something more than harsh and dissonant, and it betrayed no lack of skill. As it recurred again and again, it set me thinking of what my architect's books say about the custom in early times to consecrate the choir as soon as it was built, and that the nave, being finished sometime a half-century later, often did not get any blessing at all. I wondered idly if that had been the case at St. Barnaby, and whether something not usually supposed to be at home in the Christian church might have entered undetected and taken possession of the West Gallery. I had read of such things happening too, but not in works on architecture. Then I remembered that St. Barnaby was not much more than 100 years old, and smiled at the incongruous association of medieval superstitions with the cheerful little piece of 18th century Rococo. But now Vespers were over, and there should have followed a few quiet chords fit to accompany meditation while we waited for the sermon. Instead of that, the discord at the lower end of the church broke out with the departure of the clergy, as if now nothing could control it. I belong to those children of an older and simpler generation who do not love to seek for physical subtleties in art, and I have ever refused to find in music anything more than melody and harmony. But I felt that in the labyrinth of sounds now issuing from the instrument, there was something being hunted. Up and down the pedals chased him, while the manuals blared approval. Poor devil! Whoever he was, there seemed small hope of escape. My nervous annoyance changed to anger. Who was doing this? How dare he play like that in the midst of divine service? I glanced at the people near me. Not one appeared to be in the least bit disturbed. The placid brows of the kneeling nuns, all still turned towards the altar, lost none to their devout abstraction under the pale shadow of their white headdress. The fashionable lady beside me was looking expectantly on Monsieur C. For all her face betrayed, the organ might have been singing Ave Maria. But now, at last, the preacher had made the sign of the cross and the commanded silence. I turned to him gladly. Thus far, I had not found the rest I'd counted on when I entered St. Barnaby that afternoon. I was worn out by 3 nights of physical suffering and mental trouble. The last had been the worst, and it was an exhausted body and a mind benumbed and yet acutely sensitive, which I had brought to my favorite church for healing, for I had been reading The King in Yellow.
An excerpt from the question book. O thou who burnest in my heart for those who burn, in hell whose fire thyself shall feed in turn, how long be crying, mercy on them? God, why? Who art thou to teach and he to learn?
The sun ariseth, they gather themselves together and lay them down in their dens. Monsieur C. delivered his text in a calm voice, glancing quietly over the congregation. My eyes turned, I knew not why, toward the lower end of the church. The organist was coming from behind his pipes, and passing along the gallery on his way out, I saw him disappear by a small door that leads to some stairs which descend directly to the street. He was a slender man, and his face was as white as his coat was black. Good riddance, I thought, with your wicked music. I hope your assistant will play the closing voluntary. With a feeling of relief, with a deep, calm feeling of relief, I turned back to the mild face of the pulpit and settled myself to listen. Here at last was the ease of mind I longed for. My children, said the preacher, one truth the human soul finds hardest of all to learn, that it has nothing to fear. It can never be made to see that nothing can really harm it. Curious doctrine, I thought, for a Catholic priest. Let us see how he will reconcile that with the fathers. Nothing can really harm the soul, he went on in his coolest, clearest tones, because... But I never heard the rest. My eye left his face, I knew not for what reason, and sought the lower end of the church. The same man was coming out from behind the organ and was passing along the gallery, the same way. But there had not been time for him to return, and if he had returned, I must have seen him. I felt a faint chill, and my heart sank, and yet his going and coming were no affair of mine. I looked at him. I could not look away from his black figure and his white face. When he was exactly opposite to me, he turned and sent across the church straight into my eyes a look of hate, intense and deadly. I have never seen any other like it. Would to God I might never see it again. When he disappeared by the same door through which I had watched him depart less than 60 seconds before, I sat and tried to collect my thoughts. My first sensation was like that of a very young child badly hurt when it catches its breath before crying out. To suddenly find myself the object of such hatred was exquisitely painful, and this man was an utter stranger. Why should he hate me so? Me, whom he had never seen before. For the moment, all other sensation was merged in this one pang. Even fear was subordinate to grief, and for the moment I never doubted, but in the next I began to reason, and a sense of incongruous came to my mind.
As I have said, St. Barnaby is a modern church. It is small and well lighted. One sees all over it almost at a glance. The organ gallery gets a strong white light from a row of long windows in the clerestory, which have not even colored glass. The pulpit being in the middle of the church, it followed that, when I was turned towards it, whatever moved at the west end could not fail to attract my eye. When the organist passed it, it was no wonder that I saw him. I had simply miscalculated the interval between his first and his second passing. He had come in that last time by the other side door. As for the look which had so upset me, there had been no such thing, and I was a nervous fool. I looked about. This was a likely place to harbor supernatural horrors. That clear-cut, reasonable face of Monsignor C, his collected manner and easy, graceful gestures, were they not just a little discouraging to the notion of a gruesome mystery? I glanced above his head and almost laughed. That flyaway lady supporting one corner of the pulpit canopy, which looked like a fringed damask tablecloth in a high wind, at the first attempt of a basilisk to post up there in the organ loft, she would point her gold trumpet at him and puff him out of existence. I laughed to myself over this conceit, which at the time I thought very amusing, and sat and chaffed myself and everything else, from the old harpy outside the railing, who had made me pay 10 centimes for my chair before she would let me in. She was more like a basilisk, I told myself, than was my organist with the anemic complexion. From that grim old dame to, yes, alas, Monsignor C. himself, for all devoutness had fled. I had never done such a thing in my life, but now I felt a desire to mock. As for the sermon, I could not hear a word of it, for the jingle in my ears of the skirts of St. Paul has reached, having preached us these 6 Lent lectures more unctuous than ever he preached, keeping time to the most fantastic and irreverent thoughts. It was no use to sit there any longer. I must get out of doors and shake myself free from this hateful mood. I know the rudeness I was committing, but still I rose and left the church. A spring sun was shining on the Rue Saint-Honoré as I ran down the church steps. On one corner stood a barrow full of yellow jonquils, pale violets from the Riviera, dark Russian violets, and white Roman hyacinths in a golden cloud of mimosa. The street was full of Sunday pleasure seekers. I swung my cane and laughed with the rest. Someone overtook and passed me. He never turned, but there was the same deadly malignity in his white profile that there had been in his eyes. I watched him as long as I could see him. His lithe back expressed the same menace. Every step that carried him away from me seemed to bear him on some errand connected with my destruction. I was creeping along, my feet almost refusing to move. There began to dawn in me a sense of responsibility for something long forgotten. It began to seem if I deserved that which he had threatened. It reached a long way back, a long, long way back. It had lain dormant all these years. It was there, though, and presently it would rise and confront me. But I would try to escape, and I stumbled on as best I could into the Rue de Rivoli, across the Place de la Concorde and onto the quay. I looked with sick eyes upon the sun, shining through the white foam of the fountain, pouring over the backs of the dusky bronze river gods on the faraway arc, a structure of amethyst mist on the countless vistas of gray stems and bare branches faintly green. Then I saw him again, coming down one of the chestnut alleys of the Cour de la Reine. I left the riverside, plunged blindly across the Champs-Élysées and towards the Arc. The setting sun was sending its rays along the green sward of the Rhone pond. In the full glow, he sat on a bench, children and young mothers all around him. He was nothing but a Sunday lounger, like the others, like myself. I said the words almost aloud, and all the while I gazed on the malignant hatred of his face. But he was not looking at me. I crept past and dragged my leaden feet up the avenue. I knew that every time I met him brought him nearer to the accomplishment of his purpose and my fate. And still I tried to save myself. The last rays of sunset were pouring through the great arch. I passed under it and met him face to face. I had left him far down the Champs-Élysées, and yet he came in with a stream of people who were returning from the Bois de Boulogne. He came so close that he brushed me. His slender frame felt like iron inside its loose black covering. He showed no signs of haste, nor of fatigue, nor of any human feeling. His whole being expressed one thing: the will and the power to work me evil.
In anguish I watched him, where he went down the broad crowded avenue. That was all flashing with wheels and the tramping of horses and the helmets of the Garde Républicaine. He was soon lost to sight. Then I turned and fled into the Bois, and far out beyond it. I know not where I went, but after a long while, it seemed to me night had fallen. I found myself sitting at a table before a small cafe. I had wandered back into the bois. It was hours now since I had seen him. Physical fatigue and mental suffering had left me no power to think or to feel. I was tired, so tired. I longed to hide away in my own den. I resolved to go home. That was a long way off. I live in the Court of the Dragon, a narrow passage that leads from the Rue de Renée to the Rue du Dragon. It is an impasse, traversable only by foot passage. Over the entrance of the Rue de Renée is a balcony supported by an iron dragon. Within the court, tall old houses rise on either side and close to the ends that give two streets. Huge gates, swung back during the day into the walls of the deep archways, close this court after midnight, and one must enter by ringing at a small, certain door on the side. The sunken pavement collects unsavory pools. Steep stairways pitch down to doors that open to the court. The ground floors are occupied by shops and second-hand dealers and by ironworks. All day long the place rings with the cling of hammers and the clang of metal bars. Unsavory as it is below, there is cheerfulness and comfort and hard, honest work above. 5 flights up are the ateliers of architecture and painters, the hiding places of middle-aged students like myself who want to live alone. When I first came to live here, I was young and not alone. I had to walk a while before any conveyances appeared, but at last, when I had almost reached the Arc de Triomphe again, an empty cab came along and took it. From the Arc to the Rue de Renée is a drive more than a half an hour, especially when one is conveyed by a tired cab horse that had been at the mercy of the Sunday fete-makers. There had been before I passed under the dragon's wing to meet my enemy over and over again, but I never saw him once, and now refuge was close at hand. Before the wide gateway, a small mob of children were playing. Our concierge and his wife walked among them with their black poodle, keeping order. Some couples were waltzing on the sidewalk. I returned their greeting and hurried in. All the inhabitants of the court had trooped over to the street. The place was quite deserted, lighted only by a few lanterns, hung high up, in which the gas burned dimly. My apartment was at the top of the house, halfway down the court, reached by a staircase descending almost into the street, with only a bit of passageway intervening. I set my foot on the threshold of the open door, and friendly old ruinous stairs rose before me, leading up to the rest and shelter. Looking back over my shoulder, I saw him, 10 paces off. He must have entered the court with me. He was coming straight on me, neither slowly nor swiftly, but straight on me. And now he was looking at me. For the first time since our eyes encountered in the church, they had now met again. And I knew that the time had come. Retreating backwards down the court, I faced him. I meant to escape by the entrance of Rue de Dragon. His eyes told me I never should escape. It seemed ages while we were going. I retreating, he advancing down the court in perfect silence. But at last I felt the shadow of the archway, and next steps brought me within it. I meant to turn here and spring through the street, but the shadow was not that of an archway. It was that of a vault. The great doors in the Rue de Dragon were closed. I felt this by the blackness which surrounded me. At the same time, I read it in his face. How his face gleamed in the darkness, drawing swiftly nearer. The deep vaults, the huge closed doors, the cold iron clamps were all on his side. The thing which he had threatened had arrived. It gathered and bore me down onto the fathomless shallows, the point at which it would strike into infernal eyes. Hopeless, I set my back against the barred doors and defied him. There was a scraping of chairs on the stone floor, and a rustling in the congregation rose. I could hear the Suisse staff in the south aisle preceding Monsieur C. to the sacristy. The kneeling nuns, roused from their devout abstractions, made their reverence and went away. The fashionable lady, my neighbor, rose also, with great reserve. As she departed, her glance just flitted over my face in disapproval. Half dead, or so it seemed to me, yet intensely alive to every trifle, I sat among the leisurely moving crowd, then rose too and went towards the door. I had slept through the sermon. Had I slept through the sermon? I looked up and saw him passing along the gallery to his place. Only his side I saw, the thin bent arm, its black covering, looking like one of those devilish, nameless instruments which lie in disused torture chambers in medieval castles. But I had escaped him, though his eyes said I should not. Had I escaped him? That which gave him power over me came back out of oblivion, where I had hoped to keep it. For I knew him now. Death was an awful abode of lost souls. Whether my weakness long ago had sent him, they had changed him from every other eye, but not from mine. I recognized him almost from the first. I never doubted what he could come to do. I knew my body sat safe in the cheerful little church. He had been hunting my soul in the court of the dragon. I crept to the door. The organ broke out overhead with a blare. The dazzling lights filled the church, blotted the altar from my eyes. The people faded away. The arches, the vaulted roof vanished. I raised my seared eyes to the fathomless glare, and I saw the black stars hanging in the heavens, and the wet winds from the lake of Hali chilled my face. And now, far away, over leagues of tossing cloud waves, I saw the moon dripping with spray, and beyond, towers of Carcosa rose behind the moon. Death in the awful abode of lost souls, whither my weakness long ago had sent me, had changed him from every other eye but mine. And now I heard his voice, rising, swelling, thundering through the flaring light. And as I fell, the radiance increasing, pouring over me into a wave of flame. And then I sank into the depths, and I heard the King in Yellow whispering to my soul, "It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." The author's dedication of the book. The King in Yellow, dedicated to my brother. Along the shore the cloud waves break, the twin suns sink behind the lake. The shadows lengthen in Carcosa. Strange is the night where black stars rise, and strange moons circle through the skies. But stranger still is lost Carcosa. Songs that the Hyades shall sing, where flap the tatters of the king, must die unheard in dim Carcosa. Song of my soul, my voice is dead. Die thou unsung as tears unshed, shalt dry and die in lost Carcosa. Casilda's song in The King in Yellow, Act 1, Scene 2.
The Yellow Sign. There are so many things which are impossible to explain. Why should certain chords in music make me think of the brown and golden tints of autumn foliage? Why should the Mass of St. Cecily bend my thoughts, wandering among caverns, those walls blaze with ragged masses of virgin silver? What was it in the roar and turmoil of Broadway at 6 o'clock that flashed before my eyes the picture of a still Breton forest, where sunlight filtered through the spring foliage and Sylvia bent, half curiously, half tenderly, over a small green lizard, murmuring, "To think that this also is a little word of God." When I first saw the watchman, his back was toward me, I looked at him indifferently until he went into the church. I paid no more attention to him than I had to any other man who lounged through Washington Square that morning. And when I shut my window and turned back into my studio, I had forgotten him. Late in the afternoon, the day being warm, I raised the window again and leaned out to get a sniff of air. A man was standing in the courtyard of the church, and I noticed him again with as little interest as I had that morning. I looked across the square to where the fountain was playing, and then, with my mind filled with vague impressions of trees, asphalt drives, and the moving groups of nursemaids and holidaymakers, I started to walk back to my easel. As I turned, my listless gaze included the man below in the churchyard. His face was toward me now, and with perfect involuntary movement, I bent to see it. At that same moment, he raised his head to look at me. Instantly, I thought of a coffin worm. Whatever it was about the man that repelled me, I did not know, but the impression of a plump, white grave worm was so intense and nauseating that I must have shown it in my expression, for he turned his puffy face away with a movement which made me think of a disturbed grub in a chestnut. I went back to my easel and motioned the model to resume her pose. After working a while, I was satisfied that I was spoiling what I had done as rapidly as possible, and I took up a palette knife and scraped the color out again. The flesh tones were sallow and unhealthy, and I did not understand how I could have painted such sickly color into a study which before that had glowed with healthy tones. I looked at Tessie. She had not changed, and the clear flush of health dyed her neck and cheeks as I frowned. "Is it something I've done?" she said. "No. I've made a mess of this arm, and for the life of me I can't see how I came to paint such mud as that into the canvas," I replied. "Don't I pose well?" she insisted. "Of course, perfectly. Then it's not my fault?" "No, it's my own. I'm very sorry," she said. I told her she could rest while I applied rag and turpentine to the plague spot on my canvas, and she went off to smoke a cigarette and look over the illustrations in Courrier François. I did not know whether it was something in the turpentine or a defect in the canvas, but the more I scrubbed, the more that gangrene seemed to spread. I worked like a beaver to get it out, and yet the disease appeared to creep from limb to limb of the study before me. Alarmed, I strove to arrest it, but now the color of the breast changed, and the whole figure seemed to absorb the infection as a sponge soaks up water. Vigorously, I piled palette knife, turpentine, and scraper, thinking all the time what a séance I should hold with Duval, who had sold me the canvas. But soon I noticed that it was not the canvas which was defective, nor yet the colors of Edward. It must be the turpentine, I thought angrily, or else my eyes have become so blurred and confused by the afternoon light that I can't see straight. I called Tessie, the model. She came and leaned over my chair, blowing rings of smoke into the air. "What have you been doing to it?" she exclaimed. "Nothing," I growled. "It must be the turpentine. What a horrible color it is now. Do you think my flesh resembles green cheese?" "No, I don't," I said angrily. "Did you ever know me to paint like that before?" "No, indeed." "Well then?" "It must be the turpentine or something," she admitted. She slipped on a Japanese robe and walked to the window. I scraped and rubbed until I was tired and finally picked up my brushes and hurled them through the canvas with a forcible expression, the tone alone of which reached Tessie's ears. Nevertheless, she promptly began. "That's it. Swear and act silly and ruin your brushes. You've been 3 weeks on that study, and now look. What's the good of ripping a canvas? What creatures artists are!" I felt about as much ashamed as I usually did after such an outburst, and I turned the ruined canvas to the wall. Tessie helped me clean my brushes and then danced away to dress. From the screen, she regaled me with bits of advice concerning whole or partial loss of temper until, thinking, perhaps, I had been tormented sufficiently, she came out to implore me to button her waist, where she could not reach it, on the shoulder. Everything went wrong from time to time. You came back from the window. Everything went wrong from the time you came back from the window and talked about that horrid-looking man you saw in the churchyard, she announced. Yes, he probably bewitched the picture, I said, yawning. I looked at my watch. It's after 6, I know, said Tessie, adjusting her hat before the mirror. Yes, I replied. I didn't mean to keep you so long. I leaned out of the window, but recoiled with disgust, for the young man with the pasty face stood below in the churchyard. Tessie saw my gentle disapproval and leaned from the window. Is that the man you don't like? She whispered. I nodded. I can't see his face, but he does look fat and soft, some way or the other, she continued, turning to look at me. He reminds me of a dream, an awful dream I once had, or, she mused, looking down at her shapely shoes, was it a dream after all? How should I know? I smiled. Tessie smiled in reply. You were in it, she said, so perhaps you might know something about it. Tessie, I protested. Don't you dare flatter by saying that you dream about me. But I did, she insisted. Shall I tell you about it? Go ahead, I replied, lighting a cigarette. Tessie leaned back on the open windowsill and began very seriously. One night last winter, I was laying in bed thinking about nothing at all in particular. I had been posing for you, and I was all tired out, yet it seemed impossible for me to sleep. I heard the bells in the city ring 10, 11, and midnight. I must have fallen asleep about midnight because I don't remember hearing the bells after that. It seemed to me that I had scarcely closed my eyes when I dreamed that something impelled me to go to the window. I rose and, raising the sash, leaned out. 25th Street was deserted as far as I could see. I began to be afraid. Everything outside seemed so black and uncomfortable. Then the sound of wheels in the distance came to my ears, and it seemed to me as though that was what I must wait for. Very slowly the wheels approached, and finally I could make out a vehicle moving along the street. It came nearer and nearer, and when it passed beneath my window, I saw it was a hearse. Then, as I trembled with fear, the driver turned and looked straight at me. When I awoke, I was standing by the open window, shivering with cold, but the black-plumed hearse and the driver were gone. I dreamed this dream again in March last, and again awoke beside the open window. Last night the dream came again. You remember how it was raining when I awoke? I remember it was raining when I awoke, standing at the open window. My night dress was completely soaked. But where do I come into the dream? I asked. You were in the coffin, but you were not dead. In the coffin? Yes. How did you know? Could you see me? No. I only knew that you were there. Had you been eating Welsh rarebits or lobster salad? I began laughing, but the girl interrupted me with a frightened cry. Hello, what's up? I said as she shrank into the embrasure by the window. The man below in the churchyard. He drove the hearse. Nonsense, I said, but Tessie's eyes were wide with terror. I went to the window and looked out, and the man was gone. Come, Tessie, I urged. Don't be foolish. You have posed too long. You are nervous. Do you think I could forget that face? She murmured. 3 times I saw the hearse pass below my window, and every time the driver turned and looked up at me. Oh, his face was so white and soft, and he looked dead. It looked as if he had been dead a long time. I induced the girl to sit down and swallow a glass of marsala. Then I sat down beside her and tried to give her some advice. Look here, Tessie, I said. You go to the country for a week or 2, and you'll have no more dreams about hearses. You pose all day, and when night comes, your nerves are upset. You can't keep this up. Then again, instead of going to bed when your day's work is done, you run off to picnics at Sulzer's Park, or go to the El Dorado or Coney Island, and when you come down here next morning, you're all fagged out. There was no real hearse. There was no soft-shell crab dream. She smiled faintly. What about the man in the churchyard? Oh, he's just an ordinary, unhealthy, everyday creature. As true as my name is Tessie Reardon, I swear to you, Mr. Scott, that the face of the man below in the churchyard is the face of the man who drove the hearse. What of it? I said. It's an honest trade. Then you think I did see a hearse? Oh, I said diplomatically. If you really did, it might not be unlikely that the man below drove it. There's nothing in that. Tessie rose, unrolled her scented handkerchief, and began taking a bit of gum from a knot in the hem. She placed it in her mouth. Then, drawing on her gloves, she offered me her hand, with a frank, "Good night, Mr. Scott," and walked out.
The next morning, Thomas, the bellboy, brought me the Herald a bit of news. The church next door had been sold, and I thanked heaven for it. Not that being a Catholic I had any repugnance for a congregation next door, but because my nerves were shattered by a blatant extorter whose every word echoed through the aisle of the church, as if it had been my own rooms, who insisted on his R's with a nasal presence which revolted every instinct. And then there was, too, a fiend in human shape, an organist who reeled off some of the grand old hymns with an interpretation of his own. And I longed for the blood of a creature who could play doxology with an adamant of minor chords, which one hears only in a quartet of very young undergraduates. I believe the minister was a good man, but when he bellowed, "And the Lord said unto Moses, the Lord is a man of war, the Lord his name, my wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword," I wondered how many creatures of purgatory it would take to atone for such a sin. Who bought the property? I asked Thomas. Nobody knows, sir. They do say a gent owns the Hamilton Flats is looking at it. He might have bid more on studios. I walked to the window. A young man with an unhealthy face stood in the churchyard gate. At the mere sight of him, the same overwhelming repugnance took possession of me. By the way, Thomas, who's the fellow down there? Thomas sniffed. That there worm, sir? He's night watchman of the church, sir. He makes me tired of sitting out all night and steps and looking at you and sullen like. I'd have punched his head in, sir. Begging pardon, sir. Go on, Thomas. One night's a coming on Harry, the old English boy. I sees him sitting in them steps. We had Molly and Jen with us, sir. The girls on tray service, and he looking so insolent at us that I up and sized him up. What you looking at? A fat slug? Beg pardon, sir, but that's how I sees it, sir. They don't just say nothing. I says, "Come on, I'll punch that buttonhead of yours." Then I hopes the gate and goes in, but he don't say nothing. Only looks insulting like. Then I hit him one, but his head was cold and mushy and it sickened to touch him. What'd you do then? I asked curiously. What do you do? None. And you, Thomas? The young fellow flushed with embarrassment and smiled uneasy. Mr. Scott, sir, I ain't no coward. I can't make it out all why I ran. I was on 5th Lawrence, sir. Bugler, Kabir and all was shot in the wells. You don't mean to say that you ran away? Yes, sir, I did. Why? That's just what I won't know, sir. I grabbed Molly and run the best way I was frightened of. But what were they frightened at? Thomas refused to answer for a while, but now my curiosity was aroused by the repulsive young man below, and I pressed him. 3 years' sojourn in America had not only modified Thomas's Cockney dialect, but also given him an American sphere of ridicule. You won't believe me, Mr. Scott, sir. Yes, I will. You will laugh at me, sir. Nonsense. Well, sir, it's God's truth that I was it and grabbed me wrist, sir. And when I twisted its soft, mushy fist, one of his fingers come off in me, and the other loathing and horror in Thomas's face must have been reflected in my own, for he had, it's awful, and now when I see, I just won't get away, sir. He makes me ill. When Thomas had gone, I went to the window. The man stood beside the church railing with both hands on the gate, but I hastily retreated to my easel again, sickened and horrified, for I saw the middle finger of his right hand was missing. At 9 o'clock, Tessie appeared, and vanished behind the scene with a merry "Good morning, Mr. Scott." And when she had reappeared and taken her pose upon the model stand, I started a new canvas, much to her delight. She remained silent as long as I was drawing, but as soon as the scrape of charcoal ceased, I took up my fixative and began to chatter. "Oh, I had such a lovely time last night. We went to Tony Pastor's." "Who are we?" I demanded. "Oh, Maggie, you know, Mr. White's model, and Pinky McCormick. We call her Pinky because she's got that beautiful red hair you always love so much. And Lizzie Burke." I sent a shower of spray from my fixative over the canvas and said, "Well, go on." "We saw Kelly and Baby Barnes, the skirt dancer, and all the rest, and I made a mash." "And you've gone back on me, Tessie?" She laughed and shook her head. "He's Lizzie Burke's brother, Ed. He's a perfect gentleman." I felt constrained to give her some parental advice concerning such things, but which she took with a bright smile. "Oh, I can take care of a strange mash," she said, examining her chewing gum, "but Ed is different. Lizzie's my best friend." Then she related how Ed had come back from stocking mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, to find her and Lizzie grown up, and what an accomplished young man he was, and how he had thought nothing of squandering $50 for ice cream and oysters to celebrate his entry as a clerk into the woolen department at Macy's. Before she finished, I began to paint, and she resumed the pose, smiling and chattering like a sparrow. By noon, I had the study fairly well rubbed in, and Tessie came to look at it. "That's better," she said. I thought so too, and ate my lunch with a satisfied feeling that all was going well. Tessie spent her lunch on a drawing table opposite me, and we drank our claret from the same bottle and lighted our cigarettes from the same match. I was very attached to Tessie. I had wanted to shoot her up in a slender but exquisitely formed wound from the frail, awkward child. She had posed for me during the last 3 years, and among all my models, she was my favorite. It would have been trouble for me very much indeed had she become tough or fly, as the phrase goes. But I never noticed any deterioration in her manner, and felt at heart that she was all right. She and I never discussed morals at all. I had no intention of doing so, partly because I had none myself, and partly because I knew she would do what she liked in spite of me. And still, I did hope she would steer clear of complications, because I wished her well, and that also I had a selfish desire to obtain my best model I had. I knew that mashing, as the term she used, had no significance with girls like Tessie, and that such things in America did not resemble the least the same things in Paris. Yet, having lived with my eyes open, I also knew somebody would take Tessie away someday, in one manner or another, and though I professed to myself that marriage was nonsense, I sincerely hoped that, in this case, there would be a priest at the end of the vista. I am Catholic. When I listen to High Mass, when I sign myself, I feel everything, including myself, is more cheerful, and when I confess, it does me good. A man who lives as much alone as I do, I must confess to somebody. Then again, Sylvia was Catholic, and it was reason enough for me. But I was speaking of Tess, which is very different. Tess was also Catholic, and much more devout than I am, so taking all in all, I had little fear my pretty model, until she should fall in love. But then I knew that fate alone would decide her future for her, and I prayed inwardly that fate would keep her away from men like me and throw in her path nothing but Ed Burke's and Jimmy McCormick's. Bless her sweet face. Tessie sat blowing rings of smoke up at the ceiling and tinkling with the ice in her tumbler. You know, I had a dream last night, I observed. Not about a man, she laughed. Exactly. A dream similar to yours, but much worse. It was foolish and thoughtless of me to say this, but you know how little tact the average painter has. I must have fallen asleep about 10 o'clock, I continued. After a while, I dreamt that I awoke. So plainly did I hear the midnight bells, the winds up in the tree branches, the whistle of streamers from the bay, and even now I can scarcely believe I was not awake. I seemed to be lying in a box which had a glass cover. Dimly I saw street lamps as I passed, for I must tell you, Tessie, the box in which I reclined appeared to lie in a cushioned wagon which jolted me over a stony pavement. After a while I became impatient and tried to move, but the box was too narrow. My hands were crossed on my chest so I could not raise them to help myself. I listened and then tried to call. My voice was gone. I could hear the trample of horses attached to the wagon and even the breathing of the driver. Then another sound broke my ears, like the rising of a window sash. I managed to turn my head a little and found I could look not only through the glass that covered my box, but also through the glass panes, the side of the covered vehicle. I saw houses, empty, silent, neither light nor life in any of them excepting one. There was a house window that was on the first floor, and a figure in white stood there, down the street, and it was you. Tessie had turned her face away from me and leaned on the table with her elbow. I could see your face, I resumed, and it seemed to me very sorrowful. Then we passed on and turned to a narrow black lane. Presently the horses stopped, and I waited and waited, closing my eyes in fear and anticipation. But all was silent as the grave. After what seemed like to me hours, I began to feel uncomfortable. A sense that somebody was close to me made me unclose my eyes. Then I saw the white face of the hearse driver look at me through the coffin lid. A sob from Tessie interrupted me. She was trembling, like a leaf. I saw I had made an ass of myself in attempts to repair the damage. Why, Tess, I said, I only told you this to show you what your influence your story might have on another person's dreams. You don't suppose I really lay in a coffin, do you? What are you trembling for? Don't you see that your dream and my unreasonable dislike for that inoffensive watchman from the church simply set my brain working as soon as I fell? She lay her head between her arms and sobbed as if her heart would break. What a precious triple donkey I had made of myself. But I was about to break my record. I went over and put my arm around her. Tessie, dear, forgive me. I have no business to frighten you with such nonsense. You're too sensible a girl, too good a Catholic to believe in dreams. Her hand tightened on mine, and her head fell back upon my shoulder. But she still trembled, and I petted her and comforted her. Come on, Tess, open your eyes and smile. Her eyes opened with a slow, languid movement and met mine, but their expression was so strange that I had to reassure her again. It's all humbug, Tessie. You surely are not afraid that any harm will come to you because of that. No, she said, with her scarlet lips still quivering. Then what's the matter? Are you afraid? Yes, but not for myself. For me, then? I demanded gaily. For you, she murmured, voice almost inaudible. I care for you. At first I started to laugh, but when I understood her, shock passed through me, and I sat like one turned to stone. This was a crowning bit of irony I have committed. During the moment which elapsed between her reply and my answer, I thought of 1,000 responses to that innocent confession. I could pass it off with a laugh. I could misunderstand her, assure to my health. I could simply point out it was impossible she could love me, but my reply was quicker than I thought. I think I might think now that it was too late, for I kissed her on the mouth. That evening I took my usual walk in Washington Park, pondering over the occurrences of the day. I was thoroughly committed. There was no going back now, and I stared the future straight in the face. I was not good, not even scrupulous, but I had no idea of deceiving either myself or Tessie. The one passion of my life, buried in the sunlit forest of Brittany, was it buried forever? Hope cried no. For 3 years I had been listening to the voice of hope, and for 3 years I had waited footsteps on the threshold. Had Sylvia forgotten? No, cried hope. I said I was no good. That is true. But still, I was not exactly a comic opera villain. I had an easygoing, reckless life, taking what invited me of pleasure, deploring and sometimes bitterly regretting consequences. In one thing or another, except my painting, was I serious? And then was something which lay hidden, if not lost, in the Breton forest. It was too late for me to regret what had occurred during the day. Whatever it had been, pity, sudden tenderness for sorrow, or the more brutal instincts of gratified vanity, it was all the same now, and unless I wished to bruise innocent heart, my path lay marked before me. The fire and strength and depth of passion of a love which I had never even suspected, with all my imagined experience in the world, left me no alternative but to respond or send her away. Whether because I am so cowardly about giving pain to others, or whether it was that I have a little of a gloomy Puritan in me, I don't know, but I shrank from disclaiming responsibility for the thought of that thoughtless kiss. And in fact had no time to do so before the gates of her heart opened and flood poured towards me. Others who habitually do their duty and find a sullen satisfaction in making themselves and everybody else unhappy might have withstood it. I did not. I dared not. After the storm had abated, I did tell her she might better have loved Ed Burke than worn a plain gold ring, and she would have not hear of it. I thought perhaps as long as she had decided to love somebody she could not marry, it had better at least be me. I at least could treat her with intelligent affection, and whenever she had become tired of her infatuation, she could go none the worse for it. For I was decided on the point, although I knew how hard it would be. I remembered the usual termination of platonic liaisons, and thought how disgusted I had been whenever I heard of one. I knew I was undertaking a great deal for so unscrupulous a man as I was, and I dreamed of the future, but never for one moment did I doubt that she was safe with me. Had it been anybody but Tessie, I should not have bothered my head about scruples. It didn't occur to me to sacrifice Tessie as I would have sacrificed a woman of the world. I looked the future squarely in the face and saw several probable endings to the affair. She would either tire of the whole thing or become so unhappy that she'd either marry her or go away. If I married her, we would be unhappy. I with a wife unsuited me, and she with a husband suitable for any woman. For the past life I could scarcely entitle me to marry. If I went away, she might either fall ill, recover, or marry some Eddie Burke, or she might recklessly or deliberately go do something foolish. On the other hand, if she tired of me, and then her whole life would be before her with a beautiful vista of Eddie Burkes and marriage rings and twins and Harlem flax and heaven knows what. As I strolled through the streets, the trees of the Washington Arch, I decided I should find a substantial friend in me anyway, and the future could take care of itself. Then I went into the house and put my evening dress. For the little faintly perfumed note on my dresser said, "Have a cab at the stage door at 11," and the note was signed Edith Carmichael, Metropolitan Theater. I took supper that night, or rather, we took supper, Miss Carmichael and I, at Solari's, and the dawn was just beginning to gild across the Memorial Church when I entered Washington Square after leaving Edith at Brunswick. There was not a soul in the park as I passed along the trees and took a walk which led to the Garibaldi statue at the Hamilton apartment house. But as I passed the churchyard, I saw a figure sitting on the stone steps. In spite of myself, a chill crept over me at the sight of that white, puffy face, and I hastened to pass. Then he said something to me which might have been addressed to me or might have merely been a mutter to himself, but a sudden furious anger flamed up within me that such a creature should address me. For an instant, I felt like wheeling around, smashing my stick over his head. But I walked on and entered the Hamilton and went to my apartment. For some time I tossed about the bed trying to get around to sleep and trying to get the sound of his voice out of my ears, but I could not. It filled my head, that muttering sound, that like an oily smoke from a fat rendered fat or an odor of noisome decay. And as I lay and tossed about, the voice in my ears seemed more distinct. I began to understand the words he had muttered. They came to me slowly, as if I'd forgotten them, but at last I could make some sense out of it. It was this. Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? I was furious. What do you mean by that? Then with a curse upon him and his I rolled up over, went to sleep. When I awoke later, I looked pale and haggard, for I had dreamed the dream of the night before. It troubled me more than I cared to think. I dressed and went down to my studio. Tessie sat by the window, but I came and she rose and put both arms around my neck for an innocent kiss. She looked so sweet and dainty that I kissed her again, and then she sat down before the easel. "Hello, where's the study I began yesterday?" I asked. Tessie looked cautious, but didn't answer. I began to hunt among my piles of canvases, saying, "Hurry up, Tess, and get ready. We must take advantage of the morning light." When I last gave up searching among the other canvases, I turned and looked around the room for the missing study. I noticed Tessie was standing by a screen with her clothes still on. "What's the matter?" I asked. "Don't you feel well?" "Yes." "Then hurry. Do you want me to pose as if I've always posed?" Then I understood. Here was a new complication. I had lost, of course, the best nude model I had ever seen in my life. I looked at Tessie. Her face was scarlet. Alas, alas, we had eaten the tree of knowledge, and Eden's naive innocence was dreams of past, and I mean for her. I suppose she noticed the disappointment on my face, for she said, "I will pose if you wish. The study is behind the screen here, and I'll where I put it." "No," I said, we'll begin something new." I went to my wardrobe and picked out a Moorish costume which fairly blazed with tinsel. It was a genuine costume, and Tessie retired the screen with it enchanted. She came forth again, and I was astonished. Her long black hair was bound above her forehead with a circlet of turquoise. At the ends curled above her glittered girdle. Her feet were encased by embroidered pointed slippers, and the skirt of her costume, curiously wrought with arabesque of silver, fell to her ankles. The deep metallic blue, vast embroidered with silver, and short marquise jacket, spangled and sewn with turquoise, became her wonderfully. She came up to me and held her face smiling. I slipped my hand into my pocket, drawing out a gold chain with a cross attached to it, dropped it over her head. "It's yours, Tessie." "Mine," she faltered. "Yours. Now, go and pose." Then a radiant smile, she ran behind the screen and presently reappeared with a little box on which was written my name. "I intend to give it to you when I went home tonight, but I can't wait now." I opened the box. On the pink cot inside lay a clasp of black onyx, which was inlaid with a curious symbol or some letter of gold. It's neither Arabic nor Chinese, nor, as I found afterwards, did it belong to any human script. That's all I had to give you for a keepsake, she said timidly. I was annoyed, but I told her how much I should prize it. I promised to always wear it. She fastened it on my coat beneath the lapel. How foolish, Tess, to go and buy me such a beautiful thing like this. I didn't buy it, she laughed. Where'd you get it? Then she told me how she had found it one day while coming from the aquarium in the Battery, and how she advertised it and watched in the papers, but given up all hope in finding the owner. That was last winter, she said, the very day I had the first horrid dream about the hearse. I remembered my dream of the previous night, but said nothing. And presently my charcoals were flying over the new canvas, and Tessie stood motionless on the model stand.
Part 3. The day following was a disastrous one for me. While moving a framed canvas from one easel to another, my foot slipped on the polished floor, and I fell heavily on both wrists. They were so badly sprained that it was useless to attempt to hold a brush, and I was obliged to wander about the studio, glaring at unfinished drawings and sketches, until despair seized me, and I sat down to smoke and twiddle my thumbs in rage. The rain blew against the windows and rattled on the roof of the church, driving me into a nervous fit with its interminable patter. Tessie sat sewing by the window, and every now and then raised her head and looked at me with such innocent compassion that I began to feel ashamed of my irritation, and looked about for something to occupy me. I had read all the papers and all the books in the library, but for the sake of something to do, I went to the bookcases and shoved them open with my elbow. I knew every volume by its color, and examined them all, passing slowly around the library and whistling to keep up my spirits. I was turning to go into the dining room when my eye fell upon a book bound in serpent skin, standing in the corner of the top shelf of the last bookcase. I did not remember it, and from the floor could not decipher the pale lettering on the back, so I went to the smoking room and called Tessie. She came in from the studio and climbed up to reach the book. "What is it?" I asked. "The King in Yellow." I was dumbfounded. Who had put it there? How had it come to be in my rooms? I had long ago decided I should never open that book, and nothing on earth could have persuaded me to buy it. Fearful lest curiosity might tempt me to open it, I had never even looked at it in bookstores. If I ever had had any curiosity to read it, the awful tragedy of young Castaigne, whom I knew, prevented me from exploring its wicked pages. I had always refused to listen to any description of it, and indeed nobody ever ventured to discuss the second part aloud, so I had absolutely no knowledge of what those leaves might contain. I stared at the poisonous mottled binding as I would at a snake. "Don't touch it, Tessie," I said. "Come down." Of course, my admonition was enough to arouse her curiosity, and before I could prevent it, she took the book and, laughing, danced off into the studio with it. I called to her, but she slipped away with a tormenting smile at my helpless hands, and I followed her with some impatience. "Tessie!" I cried, entering the library. "Listen, I am serious. Put that book down. I do not wish you to open it." The library was empty. I went into both drawing rooms, then the bedrooms, then the laundry, the kitchen, and finally returned to the library and began a systematic search. She had hidden herself so well that it was half an hour later when I discovered her crouching white and silent by the latticed window in the storeroom above. At first glance, I saw she had been punished for her foolishness. The King in Yellow lay at her feet, but the book was open to the second part. I looked at Tessie and saw it was too late. She had opened The King in Yellow. Then I took her by the hand and led her into the studio. She seemed dazed, and when I told her to lie down on the sofa, she obeyed me without a word. After a while she closed her eyes and her breathing became regular and deep, but I could not determine whether or not she slept. For a long while I sat silently beside her, but she neither stirred nor spoke, and at last I rose and, entering the unused storeroom, took the book in my least injured hand. It seemed heavy as lead, but I carried it into the studio again, and sitting down on the rug beside the sofa, opened it and read it through from beginning to end.
Let the red dawn surmise what we shall do when this blue starlight dies and all is through.
When, Faint with excess of my emotions, I dropped the volume and leaned wearily back against the sofa. Tessie opened her eyes and looked at me. We had been speaking for some time in a dull, monotonous strain before I realized that we were discussing the King in Yellow. Oh, the sin of writing such words. Words which are as clear as crystal, limpid and musical as bubbling springs. Words which sparkle and glow like the poisoned diamonds of the Medicis. Oh, the wickedness, the hopeless damnation of a soul who could fascinate and paralyze human creatures with such words. Words understood by the ignorant and wise alike. Words which are more precious than jewels, more soothing than music, more awful than death. We talked on, unmindful of the gathering shadows, and she was begging me to throw away the clasp of black onyx, quaintly inlaid with what we now knew to be the yellow sign. I shall never know why I refused, though even at this hour, here in my bedroom as I write this confession, I should be glad to know what it was that prevented me from tearing the yellow sign from my breast and casting it into the fire. I am sure I wished to do so, and yet Tessie pleaded with me in vain. Night fell, and the hours dragged on, but still we murmured to each other of the king and the pallid mask, and midnight sounded from the misty spires in the fog-wrapped city. We spoke of Hastur and Casilda, while outside the fog rolled against the black window panes as the cloud waves roll and break on the shores of Hali. The house was very silent now, and not a sound came up from the misty streets. Tessie lay among the cushions, her face a gray blot in the gloom, but her hands were clasped in mine, and I knew that she knew and read my thoughts as I read hers, for we had understood the mystery of the Hyades, and the phantom of truth was laid. Then as we answered each other, swiftly, silently, thought on thought, the shadows stirred in the gloom around us, and far in the distant streets we heard a sound. Nearer and nearer it came, the dull crunching of wheels, nearer and yet nearer, and now, outside before the door it ceased, and I dragged myself to the window and saw a black-plumed hearse. The gate below opened and shut, and I crept shaking to my door and bolted it. But I knew no bolts, no locks could keep that creature out who was coming for the yellow sign. And now I heard him moving very softly along the hall. Now he was at the door, and the bolts rotted at his touch. Now he had entered. With eyes starting from my head, I peered into the darkness, but when he came into the room, I did not see him. It was only when I felt him envelop me in his cold, soft grasp that I cried out and struggled with deadly fury, but my hands were useless, and he tore the onyx clasp from my coat and struck me full in the face. Then, as I fell, I heard Tessie's soft cry, and her spirit fled. And even while falling, I longed to follow her, for I knew that the king in yellow had opened his tattered mantle, and there was only God to cry to now. I could tell more, but I cannot see what help it will be to the world. As for me, I am past human help or hope. As I lie here writing, careless even whether or not I die before I finish, I can see the doctor gathering up his powders and phials with a vague gesture to the good priest beside me, which I understand. It will be very curious to know the tragedy, they of the outside world who write books and print millions of newspapers, but I shall write no more, and the Father Confessor will seal my last words with the seal of sanctity when his holy office is done. They of the outside world may send their creatures into wrecked homes and death-smitten firesides, and their newspapers will batten on blood and tears. But with me their spies must halt before the confessional. They know that Tessie is dead, and that I am dying. They know how the people in the house, aroused by an infernal scream, rushed into my room and found one living and two dead, but they do not know what I shall tell them now. They do not know that the doctor said, as he pointed to a horrible, decomposed heap on the floor, the livid corpse of the watchman from the church. I have no theory, no explanation. That man must have been dead for months. I think I'm dying. I wish the priest would.
And this has been The King in Yellow, presented by
Wilburn.
Michael Breen.
And Robert.
That was Morgan Memorial Library's September edition of Classics Cut. thank you for enjoying the show, and
We're cutting out.
have a good day.